13.3 External, Internal, and Cellular Respiration. External respiration is the exchange of gases between air and blood, and this occurs in the lungs. So this is the movement of gases from the respiratory system into the circulatory system. If you recall from our earlier lesson, blood that is arriving in the lungs, this blood is pumped from the right ventricle, arrives in the pulmonary arteries, and this blood has a very high carbon dioxide concentration and a low oxygen concentration. This is the blood arriving in the lungs. The air that we inhale through pulmonary ventilation has low carbon dioxide when compared to the blood, and high oxygen concentration, again, when compared to that blood arriving in the lungs. And so if you look at the concentrations of carbon dioxide and oxygen, we have a concentration gradient for both gases. And so carbon dioxide is going to move down its concentration gradient by simple diffusion. So CO2 leaves the blood. It's going to diffuse across that respiratory membrane into the alveoli. Oxygen is going to move in the opposite direction. Oxygen will move down its concentration gradient, so it will cross the respiratory membrane, going from the air that has filled, inflated the alveoli, and the oxygen will move across the membrane into the capillaries. So simple diffusion for both gases, simply in opposite directions. And so here's a diagram that we looked at in an earlier segment. Alveoli is plural, alveolus is singular, so over on the right hand side we can see a single alveolus. The pulmonary arteriole, that would be the blood arriving. Remember, we use the blue to designate blood that is high in CO2 and low in oxygen. And on the opposite side of this diagram, we see the blood that is in the pulmonary venule. And so this would be red oxygenated blood. So that gas exchange has taken place. Internal respiration is the second gas exchange that takes place. This occurs in the systemic capillaries of the systemic circulation, and tissue, peripheral tissue. Now, once again, it's going to be simple diffusion, but those concentration gradients are reversed because the mitochondria constantly consume oxygen for cellular respiration. The oxygen concentration in peripheral tissue is always going to be lower than the oxygen concentration in systemic capillaries. The byproduct of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is constantly accumulating as a result of cellular respiration, and that CO2 concentration will always be greater in tissues than it is in blood. So simple diffusion once again. Oxygen is going to diffuse from the systemic capillaries out into tissue fluid. Carbon dioxide is going to diffuse from the tissue fluid into the blood. Cellular respiration was the topic of an earlier lesson. So aerobic cellular respiration, again, this occurs in the mitochondria. We looked at the oxidation of glucose as we went through glycolysis, citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. All of this to produce ATP, and oxygen is required in the final step where we do produce the bulk of our ATP. This is an excellent diagram because this allows us to tie the circulatory system with the pulmonary and systemic circuits with the external and internal respiration. So I encourage you to spend a little bit of time studying this diagram, beginning up at the top with the external respiration. So as air is taken down into the alveoli, that blood arrives in the pulmonary circuit, we get the first exchange of gas. and then the internal respiration that occurs as that oxygenated blood is pumped through the systemic circuit to deliver oxygen and pick up carbon dioxide.